Good morning, welcome to BayLab Talks webinar. Vaccination against COVID-19 is currently the #1 topic. It resonates in the world, in the public, in the media. Due to the information pressure, it is difficult to obtain credible information and facts about the vaccination itself. Therefore, it is becoming increasingly difficult to decide whether to get vaccinated. As today's webinar, we will try to provide you with information that may have helped resolve questions related to the COVID-19 vaccination. To vaccinate or not to vaccinate? That is the question for our special guest, Dr. Celec, head of the Institute of Molecular Biomedicine in Bratislava. Welcome to our webinar.
Good morning.
Dr. Celec, before we get to the question that came up in the introduction to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, let's start with a brief information about COVID-19. What happens in the body of patients with COVID-19?
Well, difficult to say. It depends, actually. 1 year ago, we were sure that the whole pathogenesis was about the lung. And we thought that if we somehow do the ventilation, the artificial ventilation, we replace basically the lung, then we can somehow get rid of COVID. But unfortunately, this is really a multi-systemic disorder. This is really a problem that affects basically every organ. And we now know that, for example, thrombosis that is induced by the immune system, the so-called immunothrombosis, that might actually damage any organ in your body, is also induced, at least in severe COVID. So that changes a lot. That changes the view, the perspective that we have on this disease, and also the potential treatment approaches.
How can such a small virus cause a global crisis? What's so special about the virus?
Actually, there's not so much special about this new virus. It's not very different from all the other coronaviruses, especially not very different from the first SARS coronavirus. The only thing that is really different is the so-called spike or S protein on its surface, because this S protein interacts with a receptor on the host cell, so on human cells. And the difference is that this new coronaviruses binds much more efficiently to this receptor. And so it needs not that much of this ACE2 protein, which is the receptor on the host cells. And if you look at the respiratory system, in the lung, we have a lot of these ACE2 proteins. In the nose, in the oral mucosa, actually only few proteins are there. For this new virus, this is enough. And that changes everything, because that means that you might be infective, despite you have no symptoms or very subtle symptoms of the disease. So in the past, if you wanted to get SARS-1, the original SARS, you had to be infected from a patient that has pneumonia, so lung infection. Currently, with the new virus, you can be infected from an asymptomatic individual without problems. And that means a lot of people get infected. And we have, of course, no immunity, basically, against this virus. And that means we have a pandemic.
Why do so many infected patients die while many others have no symptoms?
Well, that's the crucial question. And the honest answer currently is we have absolutely no idea. There are many known risk factors: obesity, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, asthma, and many others. But the crucial risk factor, by far the most important one, is high age. That is something we know from observational studies, but what we don't know is the reason. We don't know the mechanism that actually should explain this. And that is a problem, because if we don't know the pathomechanism responsible, we cannot treat effectively.
Dr. Celec, let's talk about vaccines now. What vaccines are currently available and how do they work?
Well, there are some on the market already approved, and I think everybody knows that we have the mRNA vaccines and the vaccine that is based on an adenoviral vector. But there are also other vaccines in the pipeline. For example, the standard peptide or protein vaccine that is based on the fragment of the spike protein. We or others are working on specific vaccines that might be applied as a nasal spray, so directly into the nose, inducing mucosal immunity there where the infection actually happens. There are also DNA vaccines in the pipeline, and also we should not forget about the vaccines that are based on the virus itself. Chinese vaccines, which use the inactivated virus, but there are also people working on the live attenuated virus that might also be useful.
Frequent repeated misinformation refers to the ineffectiveness or low efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. The efficacy of the vaccines is given as a percentage. But what do we mean by reading or hearing that vaccine is 95% or less effective?
Well, I don't think that the information is wrong. Most of the vaccines that have been developed are actually not safe and are not effective, but they will not pass the clinical studies. And that's why the clinical studies are so important. That's why the approval from FDA or EMA is so important, because it is this selection that actually enables us to trust the approved vaccines that are available on the market. Most of the other vaccines are either not safe or not effective. With 90% or 95%, it means this is the outcome of the phase 3 clinical trials, where, let's say, 30 or 40,000 of patients received either placebo or the vaccine in a double-blind manner. So neither the patient nor the doctors knew which arm the patient belongs to. And then they have waited until enough patients get infected. And afterwards, the study was unblinded. So basically, the infected patients were counted whether they were in the placebo arm or in the vaccine arm. 90 or 95% means that 95% of the infected patients were in the placebo arm and only a few in the vaccine arm. And actually, the World Health Organization has decided that the cutoff, that the threshold should be about 50%. So 1 year ago, we would be very, very happy if we would have a vaccine with 50% efficacy. Currently, we are not so satisfied with 80%. That is luxus, actually.
Can acceleration of COVID-19 vaccine research affect its quality, safety, and efficiency?
Theoretically, it might. And that's why we need FDA and EMA, so the regulators who are regulating the whole process and who are controlling the whole process. So all the phases, and there are some vaccines which did not underwent the standard procedure, and that's why they are not approved, and they will not be. Or they went through the whole process, but in the end, the efficacy is not high enough. Okay, so they are not approved, and that's why they should not be available. But actually, when you compare these vaccines to all the other vaccines against other diseases, these were tested on the largest cohorts. These had the highest efficacy. So we have no better vaccines.
We are talking about vaccines, the reliability, efficacy. Now let's look a little bit at coronavirus mutation. It is very often mentioned in connection with vaccination that vaccination doesn't make sense because the COVID-19 virus mutates. If there are more new mutations, does vaccinations make sense at all?
Well, two sad things, I have to say. One sad thing is that we all are going to die, but it does make sense to live, I guess. at least a couple of years we can. And so even if we know that the virus will mutate and that the vaccines will be less and less effective, I don't think that's really an argument against vaccination. And the second important thing is that Charles Darwin was right. So evolution works, and this is a wonderful example where you can really see that the virus is getting more and more infectious. And why? Well, because of evolution, because of selection. And if we have millions of people around the world which are infected, then of course there's a variability, there are mutations happening, and some of them are mutations that actually help the virus to infect other people. And so it's not a surprise that the new variants are better at infecting people. But even the latest mutants, so for example, the Delta variant, is sensitive towards vaccines. So when you are fully vaccinated, you are protected against all the currently present variants of the new coronavirus. If you are partially vaccinated, it might be complicated. But it will be completely, you are absolutely not protected against the virus if you are not vaccinated at all.
Let's also talk a little bit about treatment. Worldwide research is focused on vaccines. What's the current situation with the development of drugs against COVID-19? Will COVID-19 be able to be treated?
Well, this is a very good and very important question, actually. And it's an argument for vaccination, unfortunately, because we have virtually no treatment. The only treatment that is available are corticoids, which have been proved as drugs that really work, meaning decreasing the mortality of severe COVID, but only by 10%. So not 100% or not 100 people will die, but 90 people will die. That's great for the 10 people surviving, but that's not enough. But we have a vaccine that works. Until we don't know the details of the pathogenesis, it will be very, very difficult to find new efficient treatments. We and others are, of course, working on these potential new treatments that include, I don't know, bisphosphonates or deoxyribonuclease or some specific anti-inflammatory drugs. And there are also many labs in the world working on antiviral drugs, but I'm a little bit skeptical about this due to the pathogenesis of the infection and of the disease, because I think antiviral drugs must be applied, well, preventively or very, very soon after the infection to be really efficient. And I don't think that's possible if you have no symptoms for days or even weeks, or you have no symptoms at all. So that's very difficult, but I hope that in a reasonable time we will have a kind of treatment, but it will be never as effective as the currently available vaccines.
Virus pandemic has affected the lives of each of us and will continue. This is for sure. Thanks to science and scientists, society has a chance to manage the pandemic as best as possible. Dr. Celec, how quickly will science handle this challenge? And what are your recommendations in the end?
Well, the recommendation is very quickly get vaccinated as soon as possible with an approved vaccine. It doesn't really matter which, honestly. They all are very effective. And regarding the question about the role of science, I think science has already done what it should. Well, not the whole science, some scientists, some persons. I mean, when you think about it, it's not about the whole science, it's not about the whole society, it's about a couple of people working 24/7 for the whole last year, working on these vaccines, which are now available. And we are complaining about some very, very potential and very, very rare side effects. I don't know. Science has done what it should. Now it's time for society to apply what the scientists have provided us And if we use this weapon, this very efficient weapon, then we can conquer the pandemics.
Thank you very much, Dr. Celec, for your professional information on the topic of vaccination. Thank you all for watching and listening us. Have a nice day and stay tuned for more topics, more BayLab talks.
Bye.